That little reading was by John O'Donohue. Probably some of you know of John O'Donohue. It's a wonderful little blessing, and it's particularly poignant for today because our guest knew John O'Donohue, and he may speak a little bit about that. I don't know. But Gareth grew up in Belfast, Ireland. He was born in 1975. I'm going to read this little piece because it's really nicely written, and I wouldn't say it better. He writes and speaks about the power of storytelling to shape our lives and world peace and making justice, and how to take life seriously without believing your own propaganda. I met Gareth in 2022 when I went to a retreat in Belfast that he ran. I didn't know Gareth. I knew somebody else who was going to be speaking there. And it was just a wonderful experience because, and very much relates to what we're going to talk about today, because what we were talking about there was how the folks of Belfast and Northern Ireland overcame the troubles and what it was like to be amidst the troubles. And the people we met there were people like you and me. You know, we met all these fascinating people, but they were just regular citizens in different places. They weren't, the highest level politicians. So it was really a wonderful experience. At 49, Gareth is a youngster, but he's clearly a wise elder. So he's more than welcome, and we're excited to have him. And with that, I will turn the platform over to you, Gareth.
Thank you, Dan. Hello, everybody. You make 1975 seem like a long time ago. Good to be here. I'm in Asheville, North Carolina at the moment, and I get to work and live both here and in Belfast, where I'm from. And there's at least one other person on this call who's been over to Belfast with us, and whether you've been to Belfast in the north of Ireland or not, I imagine you know some things about the unusual history of where I grew up. And I'll say a little bit about that in a minute, but I will actually begin, Dan, by saying something about John O'Donohue, because I didn't know you were going to read that blessing. And I remember, that phrase that he uses, steady yourself, is used in that blessing for courage. And he often spoke about how a friend of his who is a really wise elder, she's a woman who's just about to hit her 90th birthday, that she had said to him while he was going through a time of great upheaval in his life, trying to make a major decision about his future. She said to him, steady yourself. Steady yourself. And that's what the breathing did for me at the start of this call. I'll also say serendipity. You sometimes need something spectacular to happen for you to pronounce it to be serendipitous, like an incredible coincidence or something amazing came across your path. And that's great. But I also think there are these moments of serendipity that are happening every day. We tend to notice the difficult things more quickly than we notice the lovely and easy things. But Dan, you mentioned that you're going to have the author of the book called Breath coming later in the season, and that book was recommended to me earlier this week by someone with whom I was having a difficult conversation. So it's really interesting for me just to come into this call at lunchtime, at least on the East Coast, on a Thursday afternoon, and already to have experienced A Blessing for Courage, written by my friend who died 16 years ago and who I miss and enjoy hearing his words. And then also to have this book recommended that somebody else was mentioning to me earlier in the week. And that feels like, okay, I really should read that Breath book. I'm going to read to you from another book. It's my book. It's called How Not to Be Afraid. I'm going to read a blessing for the next step. And then I'll share a few thoughts about that. And then we'll have some conversation. So the blessing for the next step. It's no wonder you want to be a peacemaker, for you have seen so much conflict. It's no wonder you want to heal shame, for you have been a home for humiliation. It's no wonder that you have sat in the ashes of loneliness, for you have been scapegoated to the point of wanting to die. It's no wonder that you want to transform supremacist stories, scapegoating stories, selfish stories, separation stories, for you know the weight of what happens when humans do not do their inner work. So, may you go to places of most delighted knowing with friends and deepest intimacy with lovers, and through the dangerous, exhilarating woods of activism with comrades. May you emerge into spacious places, finding reassurance that you did not deserve to be burdened by other people's shadows. May you discover that poisonous shame is built on a lie, and your loneliness is not the end. May you find the path to honest amends for your mistakes and repair for the hurt you have known. As the pain is healed and the gifts come into bloom, may they dance with each other. May the fruit of kindness and solidarity be full on your lips, and may you discover and carefully hold a vision of what you're here for. Brilliantly creative, courage when you need it, with all the community you want, woven into the fabric of this moment's crisis and this moment's gift. A sovereign, a lover, a magician, a warrior protector for the common good. May your wound transform first into a scar and then a medicine story. That the writing of that blessing kind of came out of a long time of struggling with how do we overcome. You know, I grew up in a society that was divided and where people were using violence to achieve political ends, and great suffering happened. And the story that I was like immersed in was everything is broken and nothing can fix it. And two sides, two opposing sides, were each looking for victory. The reason why Dan shared with you part of a little piece that revealed itself to me a few weeks back that I called "Not a Victory March" is because I kind of came to realize that, you know, humans looking for victory over each other isn't really a solution. Certainly there are injustices and aggressions that need to be resisted. But if we can't envisage a future in which everybody has gained something good, then our vision is incomplete. This may sound simplistic, but for a long time, because of good mentors, because of people like Archbishop Desmond Tutu, and because of people like the Reverend Dr. Leslie Carroll, and most of you have never heard of Leslie Carroll, and all of us have heard of Archbishop Tutu, which goes to show sometimes the wisest people, the most effective change agents never have a public profile. Because of people like that, they kind of taught me to see the world as like a room where there's an ever expanding table at which a great feast is being served, and everybody is invited to sit at the table, and everybody is invited to co-create the meal. And the only rule is you have to commit to not harming anybody else when you're in the room. And if you can't make that commitment, then you can't come into the room. You have to sit outside the room. And that doesn't mean we will just exile and abandon you. Some of us will go and talk to you from time to time and see if you're ready to make the commitment not to harm yet. And then you can come in to the room. And that is not a victory march. Now, it may be easy for me to envisage that kind of world, because in the north of Ireland and in Northern Ireland, for the last 25 years, at the level even of elected politics, that thing that seems most unchangeable in our world, we've actually been building collaborative structures. It doesn't mean we all love each other, doesn't mean we all even like each other, but we are moving toward sharing our resources and stewarding power together at its best, on the best days, toward the common good. I think this is something we all yearn for in our own society, but it also has to be operative at the level of our own souls and our own individual beings. I kind of feel like inside me, there are sometimes warring parties. There's a divided society inside my own being. I disagree with myself a lot. I contradict myself a lot. I think I want this, but maybe I want that. I'm ashamed of some of the things I want, like power and money and success. Um, and I'm driven by all kinds of mixed motives. Some of the motives are good. I'm sure it's the same for you. And I've come to think that that big table, that room at the big table, is also a good metaphor for the individual. That I have lots of seats at my table, and which parts of me am I making a home for? And if I conceive of love as being not competition, not a victory march, which of course is a phrase from Leonard Cohen. If I conceive of wisdom and love as being indivisible from each other, and if I imagine that all knowledge, whether we call it secular knowledge or scientific knowledge or artistic knowledge, is all embodied within this thing called love. And if I know that all the great traditions that humans have evolved agree on the same one or two principles, and we can call those the golden rule: do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, or don't do unto others what you wouldn't want them to do unto you, then why wouldn't we prioritize learning and practicing love of our neighbors? Yes, love of, if you have a concept of God, or maybe we could just call it reality with an uppercase R. You don't need to have a religious belief to devote yourself to love of reality. But embedded within all these wisdom traditions is the teaching that you can't love your neighbor and you can't love God or reality fully without learning to love yourself. I think lots of us are probably activists and people who care deeply about the common good. And if that's your story, you've probably been around communities and cultures that weren't very good at loving themselves. They were good at making sacrifices for the sake of others, but we've often experienced burnout in the face of doing that. Or if we put ourselves absolutely last and never tend to our own needs, we're not particularly useful as activists. I read a phrase yesterday, I can't remember who wrote it, it was a beautiful phrase. The world needs the generosity of well-rested people, right? The world needs the generosity of well-rested people. Another way of putting that would be, the world needs the generosity of people who truly love themselves. So a few years ago, something happened in our shared society that many of us experienced as very disruptive. It was an event that took place in November of 2016 and involved an election. And lots of us felt really disrupted by what happened in that election. Lots of us felt very uncertain and very afraid. And lots of us then tried to take some actions in response to that. I got lucky because I'm part of a community of people who were already deeply involved in activism for the common good. And some of those people realized that one of the things we needed to do in response to this very disruptive and quite anxiety-inducing event was to figure out what could we do that would enable us to experience more love, frankly. And as a result of that, become more generous people and be healthier and more whole. And what evolved out of that was two things. One was we started a storytelling night here in Asheville, North Carolina, where we just invited people to tell true stories about something good. We had a musician and we gave people guidelines for the storytelling. And we ran that about 9 months of the year monthly for about 5 or 6 years. And a community formed around that. But the second thing, and the thing that we're going to have an opportunity to practice together, and we'll start with Dan and I having a little conversation, and then we'll invite you to take the opportunity to participate in this. Was the second thing we did was we evolved a model of community conversation that at its best actually helps people to experience more love for themselves and for others. It goes way beyond the general mundane encounters that we have with each other. You know, what do you say when you bump into someone on the street? You say, "Hi, how are you doing?" And they usually say, "I'm fine." And that's the end of the encounter. We don't actually know, or if you're in the north of Ireland, we have a little phrase. You ask people, "How are you doing?" The answer is usually "not too bad," right? Which, you know, it's like the baseline is bad, and I'm not as bad as it could be. And it's good to be able to laugh at ourselves. It's good to be able to say, this is why I say, you know, to take life seriously and not take ourselves too seriously is really important. Although some of us actually do need to learn to take ourselves seriously enough, to value ourselves seriously enough. Each of us as unique individuals, in my judgment, made in the image of love, and here for a reason, and that reason is the same for all of us. That is to learn the gifts that we have and share them, and to learn the needs that we have and ask other people to help us meet them. So we evolved this little model, really, really simple. It's 4 questions. And the idea is that you would gather in groups of at least 3 people, and probably no more than about 8 or 10, because it gets hard to have a meaningful conversation with a larger group. Maybe meet over a cup of coffee or a meal, and just ask these 4 questions. The first one is, what's bringing me life? This is a deeper variation on how you doing. So what's something that's bringing me life? And the nice thing about that is it eliminates the possibility that somebody's going to complain or talk about how bad things are. Don't worry, for those of you who are a bit more doer like me, with the second question opens that door, because the second question is, what's something that's challenging, draining, or deadening me, or something that's not bringing me life? And that's an opportunity to talk about the things that are difficult. And there's a special consciousness that's required with that question, because you can ask it in a way that just opens up more sadness and more despair. The point is not to dive into the despair that we might be feeling. There definitely are moments in life when that's what's required. But most of the time, it's better to just describe the experience of the sadness or the challenge, let off some steam about it, breathe out and name what's not bringing me life. The third question is, what better story would I like to join? Looking at your life and imagining what might be coming your way in the next week or the next 2 weeks. What's the better story that's true that you'd like to join? Another way of asking that would be, what's one way that I would like to be different between now and when we next meet? I almost always come back to the same answer, and that is, when I'm in a grocery store, I want to have eye contact with the person at the checkout, smile at them, and say hello. And it's a little bit like a magic Rolodex. Those of you who remember Rolodexes, if you smile and say hello to the person at the checkout, I mean, perhaps especially if you are the person at the checkout, some of you may be, if you smile and say hello to the stranger, other things will start to take care of themselves. You'll start smiling and saying hello to your friends in a deeper way, and you never know. Most radical of all, you might look in the mirror and treat yourself the way you would if you were your own best friend. Another thing that John O'Donoghue tried to teach people, that to choose ruthlessly to always be your own best friend will actually become the best thing you can do for anybody else. Now we can also go into much more deeper and complex radical things about what kind of story we'd like to join in terms of opposition to any form of supremacism, our participation in social movements. But it could also be as simple as I'm going to try to get better sleep because the world needs the generosity of well-rested people. And then the last question, the one that I think might be most revolutionary in our society, is having heard what we've heard, does anybody here want to ask for some help or support? Or does anybody here want to offer some help or support? And in our little groups, and I've been in two of these groups that have met at least every other week for about 8 years now, and another one that just started a few weeks ago. I need lots of these groups in my life. The answer to that question about support can be as mundane as I need a babysitter. Can somebody help me? It can be as deep as I'm having an existential crisis. Could somebody go for a walk with me every Saturday for the rest of my life? To which a healthy answer would be, I'll give you the next 2 Saturdays, and then we'll see where we are after that. It can be as deep and as painful as I'm experiencing shocking grief. Can someone sit with me in my grief? Or it can be as radical and challenging to the accepted order as I can't afford my rent. Could this group decide collaboratively how to help me with that real concrete need that our society often shames or doesn't want to talk about? Money has so much power over our lives that I think one of the very best things we can do is shatter that power by talking really transparently about money. It may not be money for you, it may be something else for you, but the point is that in these circles, we can ask and offer help to each other. And over time, if groups were meeting like this, you'd really get to know each other. You'd really get to know what brings each other life. You'd really be able to support each other with that and encourage that, and maybe even add some of that to each other's lives. And we would find some of the help we'd need. I'm going to love myself right now by saying that on the written outline that Dan prepared, it says that I'm supposed to stop this part at 12:30, and it's 12:31. So I did really, really well. And I'm going to hand back to Dan, and we're going to explore some of those questions together. So
Thank you, Gareth. That was wonderful. You packed a lot in a short amount of time there. So what we're going to do is take the first two questions, and Gareth and I will take the next few minutes and just have a back and forth there. So Gareth, what is bringing you hope at this point,
yeah,
bringing you life?
I think actually because I was just talking, I'm going to ask you first. What's what's
Fair enough. Fair
what's
enough.
what's bringing you life? And I should say that, these first two questions, what's bringing you life and what's challenging or deadening you, we plagiarized those from Saint Ignatius of Loyola, but he died about 450 years ago, so he can't sue us, and we're happy to attribute these ideas to him. The way Saint Ignatius would put them is, it's rather beautiful. What are the sources of consolation in your life? And the second question would be, what are the sources of desolation uh, in your life? And I like it being put that way because when you ask what's the source, you are describing it rather than necessarily going under the feeling of it. So, Dan, either the Gareth Porch Circle version, which is what's bringing you life, or the Saint Ignatius version, which is what are some sources of consolation in your life?
And you know what, for me, they become the same thing, and in many ways. So a friend of mine who Gareth knows, I may have mentioned this one of the previous calls, said about a year ago, he said, Dan, you're on a quest. And I love the word. I am on a quest. And I went on this quest because of the kind of work that Third Act does, and I was involved a lot in climate. And I wasn't rested. I was burning out. I wasn't bringing my best self, and I realized I got to do something. So I went on this quest, and the quest I would describe is trying to develop the skills and mindset to do the things that Gareth was talking about, to be the best person I can be, to be the best activist I can be the best father I can be, while struggling with all these things that we struggle with at Third Act. And in the process of going on my quest, I've met people like Gareth and a whole bunch of other people, and some of them are authors and well known, and some of them are on this call and they're just friends, and I met them in other contexts. And just to be in the presence of these people and we met Shaylin last time, just to be in the presence of these very wise people who are thinking about these things that I think about very thoughtfully and very carefully. And I mean, I live for these conversations. I just absolutely live for those conversations, and trying to then figure out how to implement that. And big part of trying to implement that is, how do I let go? How do I learn to let go? And that's a huge thing. I'm really working on that. I have a lot of work to do. But how do I let go about, I want to solve the climate problem and I want to do it tomorrow. I want to stop worrying about things, on and on and on. So how do I learn to let go of those things and come at it from a third way? And for me, a big part of the third way is all of you on this phone call or the Zoom call. And part of that, I really honed in on when I went to Belfast and a couple other experiences, when I realized being part of a community of folks who have the guts and the perseverance and the love to try to take on a difficult problem and go do something about it, knowing that we're all taking little steps. And none of us is Nelson Mandela, or at least I'm not. But to be part of that. And so I like this phone call. I love looking at these screens and seeing all of you and knowing I'm part of that community. That is the number one thing that brings me hope and consolation at the same point. So I really think that's wonderful. And that's part of what we're trying to convey as part of the series. So I'll turn around now, Gareth, to you. You've had a little moment to recover from your previous part and to think about how would you answer the question?
Well, frankly, being in these porch circles, which is what we call them, is like, it's become a non-negotiable in my life. But a wider way of putting that is meaningful conversation with anybody. That's very life-giving to me, especially when I remember to listen, which doesn't come naturally to me. But if I were to simplify it, or kind of focus it in going for a walk with a friend. Dan and I did that last week in Vermont. I try to do it as often as possible. Just a simple walk. And often when people, when there's folk I need to meet with for other reasons, I often ask them to meet me for a walk, because it means, at the very least, even if the conversation's unpleasant or it's, burdensome or bureaucratic or something like that, we at least both get some exercise while we're doing it. And it helps move me beyond the sort of sedentary experience that I usually have as someone who works at my desk most of the time. But just being outside with somebody else, walking, is deeply life-giving to me. So what's something, Dan, that's a source of desolation or something that's not life-giving to you?
I could go on for a while, as I'm sure we all could on both of these. But I'll pick one thing. I'm a physicist by training. I'm an engineer, and then I kind of moved into another realm, but it was all about finance and numbers. So I'm a very fact-driven person, a very spreadsheet kind of person, a very, get stuff done person. And I think generally I'm a pretty logical person. And every day we are faced in the news with all sorts of just, insane things that are just not logical. They're completely insane, and things that people wouldn't have said, even 30, 40 years ago. You'd be like, scratching your head. And when I was thinking about that, I was reminded of when my son was very young, and he was in probably kindergarten or first grade. One day my wife and I were in the car, and he said, "Mom, Dad, red, blue, green, I can count." And we just, we just loved it and we laughed and he's 30 some odd years old now and we still bring that out and everybody laughs at dinner time. But imagine somebody saying that, red, blue, green, I can count, and they're, 35 and they're, giving a speech somewhere or they've been quoted in a newspaper or whatever. I mean, that's how I feel what's going on. It's just like this, just insanity about, facts are no longer respected. Science is no longer respected. That, because of my background and the work that I do, is it's a big challenge.
Hmm.
How about on your side, Gareth?
I think um, the way we add to the inevitable and maybe necessary suffering in the world by multiplying unnecessary and non-inevitable suffering.
Mm.
Like when we make things worse than they already are for no meaning, for no good reason, when we focus on stuff that is selfish or not, like you say, Dan, not factual or not based in knowledge. I'm all for having creative conflict about politics. I really am. Transformative creative conflict, wrestling with ideas, wrestling with differences, finding ways to deal positively with difference. But in as similarly to where I grew up, it felt to me like people were fighting over something that wasn't actually real or wasn't the most real way to describe what was really going on, you know. So what the way we distract ourselves from the heart of the matter and not talking about the legitimate needs that underlie all of our conflict. That's one piece. And then they're like bring it right back down to like my personal life. I find I'm in this ongoing battle with my phone, which insists on coming to bed with me and insists on going to other places with me so that I then read things that aren't as life-giving for me as reading a book or going to bed uh, at a time that would enable me to have the kind of sleep that would enable me to be well rested and then generous. And I'm fighting with it, and I'm getting slightly better over time. But there's definitely something about my use of this device that has so much gift in it. But I've never regretted sitting down and reading an actual book or a book on my, I'm a big fan of ebooks too. Like I don't mind if I'm reading them on a screen, but there's a difference between reading a thoughtful essay or a meaningful book and just mindlessly scrolling. Even if I'm mindlessly scrolling good writers who are writing about the news, I spend too much time doing that.
Mm. Mm. Um, one quick thought before we go to the next section. When you were, it's a little bit of a blend of what you're talking about. It's on my side, the illogic
Yes.
thing, but then there is you don't call it an illogic, but it's a lack of understanding. So when we were in Belfast and we met all these folks and really got immersed in the history there, and you all know this history, that you basically had these two Christian groups that were fighting and killing each other. And at some point, a whole bunch of, all along, many folks didn't get lost in that. And they understood that it was the religions that they were following, it was totally antithetical to what the religions were following.
Mhm.
But then as time went on, people really began to embrace that. They brought it back in. So there's a kind of illogic, or misunderstanding is a better word for, religions are not telling people to go kill each other people, in the name of all sorts of things. So that spiritual aspect, there's a spiritual logic there. And I think there's a spiritual logic that underscores all the work that we do with Third Act and what we're trying to do. So we're going to switch gears a little bit here. We're going to ask you to go into breakout rooms and have a conversation like we just had. For those of you who are introverts, you have two outs. One is join the room and just tell the other people in the room, look, I'd rather not speak, but if it's okay with you. You had good conversations. No one came back early, so that's always a good sign. We're gonna, in the next 15 minutes, Gareth and I are gonna chat a little bit, and then also have an opportunity for you to ask questions. And the best way to do that is if you go down to the bottom, you see the little reactions area, bottom of the screen. So you can click on that and your little hand will raise and I'll see that and I know you're trying to ask a question. So if you have a question for Gareth about anything that we've talked about or just a reaction on this, or what he and I will be talking about for the next few minutes, we'd love to have a little bit of Q&A and some back and forth. So while you are thinking about that, we're going to move into the second part of, or part of the second part of what Gareth does with the porch circles. And I'm going to just read this piece that comes from that because it's really nicely written, beautifully written. We are intrigued by the story that the purpose of life is to devote ourselves to love, and to do to and with others what we would like them to do to and with us. We're awakening to the reality that there is no them and us, there is only us. So, Gareth, a question I'd like to ask you is, in your different realms that you work in, maybe an example or two of where you've seen that come to life, where people have gotten engaged in a fight, a push, or whatever it might be. And maybe they didn't feel like they loved each other initially. Maybe they never came directly to that recognition, but you perhaps saw that develop amongst them. And then maybe also some reflections on perhaps love is what brought them to the entity, the activity itself.
I can think of, there are two examples I'd like to give. One would be the Wave Trauma Center in the north of Ireland. Wave as in WAVE. And what's extraordinary about that community is these are people who've directly suffered through the violence in Northern Ireland, and their politics isn't the reason that they're there. It's their experience of suffering, their shared experience of suffering. And so there are people, and then WAVE is not the only organization that works with victims and survivors. But there are people who you would say are from very different perspectives politically, and who might even have some, I don't know, sympathy with political movements that caused the suffering, or they might, you can be aligned with the motivation and not be aligned with the tactics or the actions of the organization. And to have people unite because of their shared experience of suffering is an age-old experience. But to have public voices that deny that is also an age-old experience, or public voices that divide and conquer and say we shouldn't talk to quote unquote the other side. So where I come from, it's been an important part of our peace building process that people overcame those voices, and even sometimes the sense that you might be betraying your own community if you reach out to the other side. So one piece would be the best work that's being done among and with victims and survivors of the violent conflict in the north of Ireland. And another would be I'm involved in what I would call transformative men's work with people who identify as men and who want to have an experience that initiates them into psychological wholeness, to replace or to take the place of rites of passage that used to be fairly normative in culture, but the post-industrial period kind of got rid of them, and particularly in the shared culture of people. I imagine the people on this call, we don't really have meaningful rites of passage anymore. And I've been involved in this organization that does that kind of work for about 13 years. And what consistently amazes me again is people who are politically different, who are aesthetically different, they dress differently from each other, they have different careers than I would normally interact with, different life histories, and it's multi-generational, you know, and from 18 up to I think we've had people in their mid to late 80s participate in the work that we do. But when we get into this container of initiating toward the common good, those differences, not that they don't matter, it's not that there's never any conflict or tension, but this context puts those differences as being less important than what we're aiming to achieve. And that's summed up by a beautiful phrase in one of the vision statements of this organization that I'm involved in. It says, "With our pasts healed and our missions of service in focus, we take individual and collective responsibility to co-create a safer and more compassionate world." I love this phrase, a safer and more compassionate world. And it's possible people who are different from each other can devote themselves to that mission. Now, the key, I think, is everybody who helps steward and facilitate this mission and vision has themselves previously been a participant in it. They have received the gift and then they want to give it to somebody else. And this is why I often think we are missing a step in our interaction across lines of political difference in this society. I know there are people who are just enraged and who might feel scary or risky to be around. I know there are people who are just unpleasant and do not want to have a dialogue about anything. I'm not talking about them. You know, and there are people who are gifted and called to go into the hardest places and even the risky places. Our peace process in Northern Ireland would never have happened without those kinds of people. But most people aren't called to go into the riskiest and most difficult places with the most difficult people. But there's a lot of people who are sort of in between the most difficult people and the people we already relate to. There's a lot of people who, if we would make one attempt at, is there some project we could collaborate on that serves the common good? You know, that doesn't require us to talk about politics is something I've always valued about Habitat for Humanity, is that, you know, anybody who's able to use a hammer can bang a nail into a wall, you know, and I don't mean to diminish or reduce the work of building a house, but you know what I mean. So those two places, the work with victims and survivors in the north of Ireland, and this transformative men's work where the vision is a safer and more compassionate world. But a key seems to be somebody once loved me, and so it is now I've experienced that love from somebody else, and I'm now more apt to share that with others.
Mm, mm, mm. As you were speaking there, I was thinking about, I read a really interesting book. It's called The Nordic Theory of Everything. And by the way, again, if you have a question or a comment you'd like to make, hit that reactions button at the bottom, raise your hand, and I will call on you. And one of the premises of this book is really, it's a really well-written book. It's funny but well researched. It's kind of the differences between the Nordic countries and the US and culturally. And one of the things she comes down to is a difference in the emphasis on we versus me in the Nordic countries versus the US culture. Not to say that the Nordic cultures are, you know, they're not, angelic or whatever, you know. I mean, they have both of those dimensions, right? But her sense was that in the Nordic countries, there's more a focus on community and less on me. And then the argument that she, from her observations, is saying the opposite about the US, which is, that's, I feel that strongly. I wonder about where you come from in Ireland, you know, what do you observe there, and whether Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland are different in that regard or not?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Um, yeah, you know, there's we have this unusual thing in the north of Ireland where we talk about the two communities, and so people, you know, and it's not true. I mean, there's 1.9 million people in Northern Ireland, so I think there's at least 1.9 million communities. If it's accurate that each of us has a dialogue going on inside us, I am a community as well. But another way it's not accurate is there are people in the north of Ireland who don't feel allegiance to either the pro-British or the pro-Irish community, where it's not the most important thing in their mind or their politics. Having said that, because of that kind of two communities narrative, people have had an allegiance to an idea that may or may not manifest at a we level. You know, it may or may not manifest in terms of how you treat your neighbors, or do you have someone who could help you if you were lonely or in need. The anecdotal sense I get, frankly, is that the working class communities in the north of Ireland actually have a much more tightly knit sense of interdependence with each other. That the more middle class people become, the more distant they become from their neighbors, and I think that's true in the US uh, uh, as as well. Um, Two kind of caveats. One is I really think that universal healthcare in the UK since 1945 makes the UK and Northern Ireland culturally different from the US. It's not like everybody's going around saying, I know I'm caring for you through my taxes, but there's like a subconscious thing because of people's exposure to the National Health Service, even though everybody complains about it and there are sometimes long waiting lists. Nobody ever complains about the people who work for the National Health Service. No one ever blames the doctors, nurses, and support staff. That's around bureaucracy. So there's a sense of we all belong to the same system, and that is, if you've not experienced that, it's very hard to imagine what it feels like. And the second thing is that was only accelerated by COVID, at least in the UK and Northern Ireland. Again, people were frustrated and some people suffered, and some people suffered in shocking ways. But there really was a sense of people pulling for each other and caring for each other, and even some people not wanting to do anything that could put somebody else at risk.
Interesting. I'm going to lots of different questions come to mind here. One thing, so folks might be interested because we're kind of coming to a close. Whatever you would like to talk about with respect to the things that you do, and I've experienced a couple of them. I've experienced the Porch Gathering. I've experienced the retreat in Belfast, and then some of your writing, and I think there was someone in the chat who may have been asking about your book, or you have books. You have more than one book. Any of that you'd like to talk about? That's the first thing. And then the second question is, as you close, what message would you like to? And you and I didn't talk about this at a time. We didn't talk about either of these questions. But so I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. The second one is a little harder, I think. What message do you want to leave for us? You know what we're about. You know that we're elders. You know what we're trying to
Yeah,
do. You know
yeah.
why we're gathered here. So what message of inspiration would you like to leave us with?
I need you. And so does everybody else. I'm grateful when elderhood is beginning to be honored once more, or at least noticed and acknowledged. And it's always been necessary, and some cultures understood how to respect it, and to have an initiatory journey for people stepping into elderhood. And I love the idea that there's two stages of elderhood. One being looking back at younger people, what can you give that we need? What do you want us to know that maybe you didn't know, but you know now that would be helpful for us to know? Or just how can you hold space for us and for younger people, knowing that we are going to mess up in the same ways that you did, and that we can't be prevented from doing so, and that there's some stumbles that we need to make in order to learn. How can you hold space for us? Another way of doing that would be, people who are in the third act sometimes have resources like time. Sometimes they have money. But even if they don't have money, they might have a sofa, or a back deck, or a coffee maker that you could just invite some of us to come and experience unconditional welcome. I have a friend coming over this afternoon, 82 years old, and intimately connected with our lives, myself and my husband. I want to acknowledge my friend Karen, and her couch is a home for me, in ways that my own couch never feels. And she literally just sent me a text message as I was saying her name. So there's more serendipity. So time, resources, and sometimes, you might have a little bit of, some younger people maybe need a bit of a financial cushion to start their projects. But I think it's mostly just the resource of being. And then I think there's a second stage of elderhood, which is where, Bill Plotkin calls it, I think, the sage in the mountain cave. I think that's the phrase, where instead of you going to other people and helping resource them and, encouraging them in an active way, you move into the stage of, no, everybody comes to you. They come to you. You don't have to go anywhere anymore unless you really, really want to. But you have something that people know they need, and they will come to you. So I'll conclude that with the same statement I began with, which is that I need you. I need you. And you wanted me to say something about books as well, Dan?
Well, first, that, you know, what a beautiful thing to say. I need you. I mean, that was like the perfect answer, and vice versa. Yeah, a little bit, yeah, you do all these cool things, and yeah, just say a little bit about it.
Sure, thank you. Well, so with my husband Brian Ammons, who's a spiritual director and teacher, we steward something called the Porch, which is an kind of overarching, kind of an umbrella for some lovely little projects. One is we publish essays online at theporchcommunity.net. Another is we take groups of people and individuals, within groups, to Ireland for an immersion experience that we call a retreat, that Dan has been on, where we experience the landscape and the culture and then learn a bit about peace building. And, you can find out about that at irelandretreats.com. And I get to write. My most recent book is this book called How Not to Be Afraid. And then I have another co-authored book coming out later this year called A Whole Life in 12 Movies, where myself and my co-author Kathleen Norris, write about one movie for each stage of the life cycle of a human, from before birth through to after death. Um, we're not sure that what we write about before birth and after death is accurate, because we weren't able to do on the ground research, and I don't remember a whole lot about before my birth. But that book comes out in October, and I'm sure Dan will share with you links to find me. We love to share what we're doing, and love to have any of you come with us to Ireland. We still have a few spaces on our summer retreats this year, and we have one in October, as well. But our motivation is to share the gifts we've been given, and to find and to create spaces in which we can name the needs that we have, and all take care of each other and keep enlarging the table.
Love that analogy, enlarging the table. I see Marianne has raised her hand. You want to unmute yourself and
Yeah, thanks. Gareth, I want to raise up the books that you co-wrote with Brian McLaren, The Seventh Story, and the gorgeous one for children, Corey and the Seventh Story.
Thank
They're
you.
absolutely fabulous. And what you shared today, I'm just so grateful that you and Brian both have such a way of sharing what I know to be true, and you shared in such poetic, inspiring language that just moves me deeply. So thank you.
Thank you so much.